This is a Squiz podcast. We're your shortcut to being informed. Year Ahead is our Hit the Ground Running New Year podcast series where we chat with our friends and news about what they've got their eye on this year. And in true Squiz form, we get their recommendations. I'm Kate Watson.
And I'm Claire Kimball.
Lauren Sams is our guest this week. Lauren is the fashion editor at the Australian Financial Review. She covers the local and global business of fashion. Welcome back.
Hi, good to be back. Thank you.
Third podcast with us, and you're a hit.
Yeah, absolute hit. You've become a very fast favourite with Squizzes, so we're really delighted to have you back.
Well,
we're going to be talking about these very smart insights that you have on the world of fashion, but also some practical recommendations, which we're really down for.
Okay, sounds good.
Let's do it. Lauren, we're going to mark your homework on last year first.
Sure, let's do that. How did I go?
You told us that red would be on trend, and I don't even think we need to discuss that. I think that's absolutely tick.
Okay, great.
Done.
You done?
Concept stores.
Sure.
Was going to be a big thing last year, as you predicted.
Yeah.
Do you think you nailed that one?
I think I am seeing more concept stores. Even just walking here today through this Sydney suburb where where you're podcasting from, I'm seeing a lot more, sort of smaller stores with a bit more of a curated attitude to fashion and, pulling in things like homewares and beauty and things like that. Yeah, I think we'll see more and more of those actually.
Okay, so an ongoing trend.
An ongoing
perhaps.
Trend. Let's see how we go next year.
Well, let's see. I mean, I feel like the big one, though, was you spoke about fan fashion.
Yes.
Sort of costume fashion. We saw Taylor Swift come to Australia. I said in our Year Ahead podcast last year that there's no way I'm dressing up for Taylor Swift. I'm not doing that. I absolutely dressed up for Taylor Swift.
You and everyone else.
Yeah. Talk to us about this fan fashion sort of moment we're having.
Yeah, I think I think it didn't start with Taylor, obviously. I mean, people have been dressing up for concerts, for a very long time. But I feel like there's been a real explosion in particularly young people dressing for concerts. So like Harry Styles, Beyonce, Sabrina Carpenter now, who is obviously kind of part of that Taylor Swift universe, I would say, Billie Eilish. They all have very distinct modes of dress. And it's really about being part of a tribe, I think, which is a lot of, what fashion is about. But yeah, I think one of the biggest things that we saw this year was the Taylor Swift effect on the economy when she came to Australia in February and, and then finished her tour in November, was it? December? It's just amazing to see what she did for every single city that she touched down in. It's incredible.
There's actually some numbers around that. I think you mentioned to me $140 million injected into the Melbourne economy.
That's right.
Just because of Taylor Swift.
Yeah, they believe that it was $140 million. And, that's beyond clothing. But, I remember speaking to the CEO of Glassons, which is a New Zealand sort of fast fashion label, very popular with young girls. And he was saying that they had this set, so like a top and a skirt. It was purple. It had sequins on it. It was not related to the Eras tour whatsoever, but they put it out in January, just before the Eras tour began, and it sold out within a day. And, someone on their team was like, I think something's happening here. But I heard from a lot of people, Jane Liu, who runs Shopo, which again is another fast fashion brand. She was saying that, it was almost like something that was saving retail at that time. January is traditionally quite slow for retail, and they just had this crazy effect where things like sequins were going out the door, things that you normally see selling in party season, like November, December. Things were just flying out the door or, added to carts, as the case may be. And it's just incredible to think that one person can have that kind of influence. I'm not sure when we'll see something like that again. It was pretty remarkable, particularly when she's not considered a very fashionable person herself. I think that's kind of an interesting dichotomy. She doesn't have a stylist. She kind of dresses herself. She's, not really...
Can you expand on? I didn't know any of that. Please tell me more.
Yeah.
No.
So Taylor has never really been associated with a fashion brand. Most celebrities of her stature would have a stylist or they would have an endorsement from like a luxury house, jewelry, watches, all that sort of thing. She doesn't do any of that. She styles herself. I believe she has a personal shopper, but everything else is done she does it all
Yeah.
herself. And apparently with mixed results. I won't comment on that because I love Taylor so much.
Yeah.
She can wear whatever she wants.
And imagine the day that she does do a deal.
Yeah.
Like if she ever does.
Correct.
It'll be worth so much money.
Correct.
Because of the premium, I guess, on the exclusivity that she's not one of those girls that just picks up endorsements left, right and centre.
Sure. Yeah, that's right. I mean, look at someone like Zendaya who has she has a jewellery brand, a watch brand, a clothing brand, a beauty brand that she represents. And, Taylor could have all that.
Yes.
But she chooses not to.
Yeah.
It's very interesting.
We could do a whole Taylor Swift episode.
Let's do it.
We did like a series of 2 or 3 ourselves last year.
Yeah, we could absolutely. Because it
huge.
is fascinating. But I mean, I just wanted, before we leave last year and move on to sort of that future facing stuff, one of the things I spoke to you about earlier in the year is fast fashion.
Yes.
The rise of Temu, Shein. I think it'd be fair to say when we chatted about fast fashion, I think it was back in sort of maybe May, there was a lot of concern from you about fast fashion.
Yeah.
Where are you at now?
The problem is completely solved and there's no more fast fashion. So that was great.
Amazing.
We solved that. Yeah, I think that was that one podcast.
I don't know why we haven't talked about it more.
It's all done, yeah. Look, fast fashion is getting faster and we saw the AFR publishes something called the Young Rich List, which is, part of our Rich List franchise. On the Young Rich List this year, we had a lot of fast fashion brands.
I noticed that.
Yeah, the founders of White Fox, for example. I don't know if you've seen those tracksuits around.
And the bus ads.
The
They
bus
do
ads.
the bus ads, yeah.
Very ubiquitous bus ads, yes. There's activewear brands like Stax and LSKD that are founded by young Australians as well.
Dish was another one.
Dish as well, that's right, yeah. And then we have...
Is Dish fast fashion?
Yes, I would say so.
Okay.
Yes.
How do you define it?
I define fast fashion as mass made. So like when you're making big quantities and it's relatively cheap. I mean, Dish is an interesting...
Sort of at the top end of fast fashion.
It is.
Yeah.
It's more of your... Like if you were to compare it to a high street brand, it would be similar to like a Country Road or a Witchery. So it's not exactly... It's not like dirt cheap Shein prices, for example, but it's also very trend driven. So, they drop new clothing every week pretty much. So it's more about the volume and, the amount that is actually being produced.
And kind of made for that Instagram algorithm too, isn't it?
That's right.
How I engage with some of these brands, particularly Dish, I think, is I see something that looks amazing in an Instagram reel.
Yes.
And that's what gets me into their site.
Yes.
And that's what, the discoverability of the whole brand.
Yeah.
But it does feel like I forget about it in 2 seconds and then I click on the next one in, 3 or 4 weeks later and the sort of cycle repeats.
Yeah, that's right. And the speed and the volume, I think, is what drives the definition of fast fashion for me. Yeah.
Okay.
And, brands such as Dish will talk about having a cleaner supply chain, using fabrics that have been sustainably sourced. Dish uses a lot of linen, which linen is actually quite good for the planet, like relatively, relative to things like polyester. But I think, in terms of how much they're producing and the speed at which it is made, it's not exactly a luxury purchase. Yeah.
And it's the behaviour point, isn't it? Because I think what we spoke about at the time was the behaviour is that you don't value it as much because it is something that you can get readily, you can get cheaply, and then you can wear it once and you go around again.
Yeah.
So what I'm hearing from you is as we head into 2025, you are like fast fashion's still a huge topic of conversation and a huge concern.
It's a huge concern. I mean, in November, Amazon launched Amazon Haul, so HAUL, which is kind of like their version of Temu or Shein. Extremely low prices for clothing, basically, and similar to Shein. Amazon is known for like very quick delivery, but this is similar to Temu in that there's a longer wait time, but incredibly low prices, gamified purchases. Like it's pretty much a ripoff of those Chinese companies. But I think it's just so interesting that, you're having, everyone knows this is a problem. and we just aren't opting out.
The temptation is real. Like I got
Sure.
to admit,
Yeah.
you scroll through your phone and you see an ad for something you've been looking for, and I look at it and it's usually from Temu, and I've resisted the urge. If we're marking our homework,
Yes, we still are. Yeah.
I've resisted the urge, but I can see why it's so incredibly tempting to buy something from these places.
And that's what I wanted to ask you, Lauren. Like, do you think it's actually landing with Australian consumers, this message around just have a think a bit more about who is making the clothes that you're buying,
And what
how they're
happens to
doing
them.
it, what happens to it at the other end? Do you think that's getting any cut through yet? Not really. Not by the
No.
volumes.
No.
I really don't think it is. I mean, I know that just sounds so blunt.
Yeah.
But I mean, the numbers don't lie.
Yeah.
Like, I think in that fast fashion episode that we did, Kate, we were talking about how it's something like 10% of all Australia Post packages in a month at the start of the year, I think it was February or March, were from Temu and Shein. Like 10% of all packages. That's insane.
Isn't it amazing?
And maybe they're not all apparel, but, it's a lot. And this has been happening for a really long time. I remember reading when ASOS, do you remember that brand? When that was really big in sort of the early 2000s.
That's right.
Something like 2 jets full of clothes were coming over from the UK every week to Australia. So,
We're good online shoppers.
we're good online shoppers. I think we know that fast fashion is not good for the planet, but we just are not
The
really.
numbers say we're still doing it.
Yeah, we're not willing to give it up yet.
Lauren, of course, we asked you to think about the big fashion news theme for this year. Where do you think it's landing?
Well, at the end of last year, there was just a lot of sort of loose ends. So, for example, we have Chanel tying up a little bit of a loose end, actually, appointing a creative director, only the 4th creative director in the history of the house,
Wow.
Yeah. And that was after a 6-month search. So Virginie Viard, who was Karl Lagerfeld's right-hand woman for many, many years, was appointed the creative director after he passed away in 2019.
Was it that long ago?
Yes,
Yeah,
it was my
wow.
first week at the Australian Financial Review,
Yeah,
actually.
wow.
Yeah. She left in June. There was obviously a big hole to fill there. They appointed the Bottega Veneta creative director, Mathieu Blazy, to take her place. But that was, that was a hole for a very long time and a hotly contested, who's going to take this seat, was big news. But then we've had so much other stuff happening, like My Teresa, which is an online department store, bought Net-a-Porter, which for a long time was considered the gold standard of retailers. It's kind of like the Iconic coming in to buy David Jones or something like that. Saks Fifth Avenue bought another department store called Neiman Marcus. So you've got like a lot of consolidating happening, a lot of upheaval. Kim Jones, who was the creative director at Fendi, resigned. The designer at Celine, Hedi Slimane, resigned actually like the day after Paris Fashion Week ended. And then he was replaced by a designer from Ralph Lauren. And then in the US, you also had this court case where 2 brands, Tapestry and Capri. So Tapestry owns companies like Coach and Kate Spade, and Capri owns Michael Kors, Versace, Jimmy Choo. There was a motion that they were going to consolidate and become one company, but the FTC said no to that, and so there's like just
anti-competitive.
Is that like our
anti-competitive.
ACCC?
Yeah,
I guess.
exactly.
Yeah, okay,
Yeah.
right.
For listeners, like, what does the head of Chanel turning over actually mean for us more broadly? Does it mean anything?
That is such a good question. It does mean something. I mean, okay, so I say the words Karl Lagerfeld to you.
Yes.
What does that mean to you?
I think of the cat.
Chipette.
No, but
You're asking the wrong people.
But I
No, I don't think I am. I think the point is that, someone like Karl Lagerfeld being appointed at Chanel and being there
Yeah.
for so long, that translates to a non-fashion audience because Chanel is such an important fashion house. It's held privately. No one really knows the owners, but they know who the creative director is. And, it really leads the conversation in terms of fashion, which is funny because, people say that they kind of do the same thing over and over, which in some ways they do. But a creative director at a house like that really does set a lot of trends. They just do. And it's not simply, I would say, clothing trends. It's also trends of like advertisements, runway shows. Someone like Carl, for example, was really the first one to do like those big spectacle runway shows. So they hold them at the Grand Palais in Paris. It's this like enormous cavernous space that actually Chanel recently paid to have renovated. That's the,
the power
the
of
power
that.
and influence. Yeah. And he was the one who like put a rocket ship in the middle of the Grand Palais. And, now like things like that are not standard, but like that's the bar, So they set the bar very high. They also set trends with, their ambassadors, who they have in their marketing and, who they have in their circle, beauty.
And the looks of women they like too, I guess, come into health and body shape and
for sure, all
of those sorts of things.
So whoever is at the top really sets a lot of those, trends.
Interesting.
So a lot happened in fashion in 2024, which I think is going to affect luxury houses into 2025. So it's going to mean, I think, higher prices, even higher prices.
Even higher prices.
Yeah. So luxury earnings are pretty much down across the board with a very few exceptions. So companies like Ralph Lauren continue to be very successful. Hermes continues to be very successful. Chanel. But the LVMH companies, the Kering companies, so Kering owns like Balenciaga, Gucci. LVMH obviously owns Louis Vuitton, Dior, amongst other brands. Their earnings have been down for a little while now. And what that will mean is that prices for individual items will go up. And then I think the knock-on effect of that is a lot of counterfeit items. But equally, I think that we will see high street brands like COS, Uniqlo, Zara, H&M. What they do is more like a dupe culture. It's not counterfeit. They're not saying this is a Bottega Veneta bag. What they're doing is,
It looks like one?
It looks very similar, yes. And so I think we'll see those brands get better and better at that. So, for example, Uniqlo have just appointed Claire Waite-Keller, who used to be the creative director at Givenchy. She designed Meghan Markle's wedding dress, for example. So she is now at Uniqlo.
So is she there full-time now?
She's there full-time.
Yeah, right. I saw last year that she'd done a collection. I thought it was just a collab.
Yeah.
And there was some amazing, trench coats and roll neck jumpers and all that kind of stuff. And I knew her from Meghan Markle.
Yes.
But she's there full time.
She's there full time. Okay. So I think that will become a bit of a trend, designers of her caliber.
Yeah.
And they have a lot more freedom at a place like Uniqlo and probably a bit more sort of money and relevance to kind of spread their wings a bit.
Is this about cost of living pressures?
Yeah, I think so.
Is it about the China economy struggling a little bit? Because I know that luxury market was propped up, wasn't it, by Chinese shoppers essentially.
And Russian shoppers.
In big numbers, being able to spend.
Absolutely, yeah. So we're seeing the effect of that. And I think next year as well, we're going to see, I know that you wanted to talk about this, Kate, I think we're going to see brands really struggle with social media dissonance, so whether or not TikTok is banned in the States, which it might be, we've got a looming social media ban for young people. And I think just also, I feel like there might be a backlash against things like affiliate links. I don't know if you subscribe to Substacks, but I was just overwhelmed on Black Friday. And then kind of in the weeks after that, leading up to Christmas and then beyond, with just newsletters full of product recommendations, all leading to Amazon affiliates. I feel like there's going to be a backlash to that sort of thing. Or maybe that's just a backlash of one person.
Yeah, I definitely noticed that. I feel the thing I'm curious about with the social media aspect is because, I mean, your quote to me was social media and fashion go together like Posh and Becks. Like it kind of is where people shop. And it's certainly where you discover items. We've already had an example of that in this podcast.
Yeah.
It is.
Yeah.
So just expand on that a little bit in the sense of under 16s finding stuff on there. Is that like how big could that impact be if they aren't on social media?
I mean, it's a little bit like how long is a piece of string, but, you know, so many fashion and beauty brands in particular, that's where they find and nurture their customers. It's relatively cheap. Obviously, it gets more expensive and, you know, I'm sure anyone who works in media knows that and probably beyond. But it's a very accessible and pretty straightforward way to really target the exact people that you want as a brand shopping with you and to keep them coming back for more. So you don't have to rely on them to, you know, go into your stores or, I don't know, pick up your catalogue or, you know, any of those sort of more traditional methods of shopping that we've had in the past. You know, it's right there in your hand all the time. It's easy. Your credit card details are saved, you know, all of that sort of thing. Pulling the bottom out of that, fashion and beauty brands are already, you know, they're looking for alternatives already.
I was going to ask, what are some of the alternatives that are being explored?
Well, they're just making new apps, basically. So I saw one this morning that was called Connect or Connect. It had like a Y instead of the E at the end.
Of course.
And it's a fake.
Can't spell it correctly.
Yeah, exactly. You know, it's like a substitute for TikTok. It works in a very similar way. And so, yeah, I think we'll just see
Innovation.
new versions come along.
And what about the opportunity for retailers, like, I guess, to build their own apps?
Sure. Look, speaking of catalogues, I would love to see a return to the catalogue. When I was in the States in
we're
September.
We're concocting a business idea as we speak.
Oh, totally. I mean, I love print, you know.
Yeah.
But when I was in the States in September, I went into J. Crew, which is like a high street brand of theirs. And they had this beautiful catalogue that they had just revived for the fall season. And Demi Moore was on the cover and it was beautifully packaged. I brought home like 4 copies of it to give to people because I just thought it was so beautiful. I would love to see.
Me. I love J. Crew.
Yes.
And that I've followed their little journey over the last bit.
Yes.
And Country Road's done something similar, haven't they? Like gone back to this sort of heritage.
Yes. Yeah.
Not just in the way that they market themselves, but also in the product.
Totally. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I think they're definitely following that J. Crew playbook, which is a very smart idea. But, you know, I would love to see, a brand like Country Road or maybe like Oriton or something like that. You know, it's an Australian brand with, you know, with a bit of a story to tell. R.M. Williams could do it. There you go. Some free marketing ideas there.
But what I'm hearing from you, though, from a consumer's perspective, is that you've got high-end fashion brands increasing their prices potentially, so it's even harder to access those.
Yep.
I'm hearing fast fashion be the place of choice for most consumers.
Most of us, yep.
There's a widening gap in the middle.
Yeah,
it seems.
So there is a widening gap in the middle, and it's a ripe place for brands to target people, basically. So, you know, someone who is not a luxury shopper is not going to spend $10,000 on, you know, a Chanel handbag that's sort of this big. And as well as high prices, these pieces are increasingly hard to actually get your hands on.
So, but that was where I was kind of going. Is the big opportunity, and I know that there are a lot of places leaning heavily into this, is that resale opportunity. So
Resale,
your eBays and those kind of places.
Yeah, resale is very big, and you know, brands themselves are getting into their own resale. So, you know, for example, like Gucci has Gucci Vault, which is a mix of archival pieces. And also, you know, it's a place where, let's say you've got a beautiful Gucci Jackie bag, Claire, you want to sell it, you can sell it through Gucci. And so, you know, it works for everybody, basically. Gucci gets a little bit back, you get some money, but also the end customer who takes that bag knows that it's authenticated.
Verified.
And so they're happy with that.
I'm trying to be I'm trying to be hopeful because we're all very depressed about fast fashion, right? But maybe there is this like real opportunity for this resale,
totally,
you know, market
Absolutely.
to emerge in the way that I know a lot of people would like to see happen. And you know, maybe that widening gap between what consumers are willing to do. I mean, the people that will shop cheap will always shop cheap.
Sure.
The people who will shop high end will always shop high end. But then there's like people in the middle that don't really want to access the lower end.
No.
But can never access the higher end.
Sure.
They now can sort of get in, I guess.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah.
And we're actually recycling clothes in the meantime.
Yes.
Indeed.
I mean, I see it with I have a 12-year-old daughter, and she loves going to this place called U-Turn, which is like a curated Vinnie's, I suppose. And, so we go there and, it's pre-loved clothing.
Yep.
But it's sort of edited in a way that makes it feel like a proper shopping experience, not like going into...
You get the special thing.
Yes.
As well.
It's not like going into a
Yeah.
charity store or anything like that, which, to be frank, she kind of likes that as well. She likes the thrill of the chase. And I think a lot of young customers actually quite like the discovery model of those sorts of things. Again, when I was in Paris, Clang.
Yes. We knew we'd get there back there.
So I was with a friend, and her 13-year-old daughter was going into the vintage stores there where you can buy like a kilo of clothes for, €5 or something like that. And so, she
You see
loved
what
that.
you get.
Yeah. So I think younger consumers in particular I think they're probably the ones veering away from fast fashion. They still like cheap things, but they are willing to sort of be a bit more flexible, have things that, someone else has owned before, but they like the brand names as well. And, they like looking for those kinds of things. And when I say brand name, I mean like Adidas, not Hermes.
Let's get to your recommendations.
Okay, let's do
What
that.
are you reading? What are you looking at? What are we recommending to people?
Okay, can I tell you something non-fashion related that
Please.
I don't know if I loved this, but I watched this show on Netflix with my husband called Mr. McMahon. Have you heard of this?
No,
No.
but you did give us a good recommendation last year that was a bit of a you can watch it with your partner kind of thing.
Okay.
Which I think, now I can't remember what it was, but those are always good.
I think that was Kingdom
Yep.
of Dreams. Which
Yes, it was,
Yeah,
yes.
which I still recommend. If you want to understand the fashion world broadly.
Yes.
It's on Stan, and it's, I think, a 3-part series, and it's basically about how LVMH and Kering came to be and came to sort of dominate the fashion world. But back to Mr. McMahon, or if you're American, Mr. McMahon. So it's about wrestling, which is like there is a fashion element there, definitely. But it's not necessarily a fashionable pick. I wouldn't say, did I enjoy it? I don't think I would say that, but I found it fascinating. And I watched it, my husband and I watched it the week after Donald Trump was elected again in November. And just bear with me when I say watching a 6-part series about the history of wrestling to this day explains so much of how Donald Trump was elected.
Yeah, right.
That was a long way to get to a non-recommendation.
Sorry. Let me take several pathways.
No, I know what you're saying, because it is like if you want a bit of an insight.
It stuck with you.
But also that insight
It's-
into how people might be thinking.
Yeah.
And I think
And-
so many, particularly women, I did an interview with Arthur Sinodinos, and the number one question that I got feedback on was like Australian women trying to understand America and,
Yeah.
and electing Donald Trump. Any insights you can get into that is hugely valuable, I think.
I would say watch this. It is fascinating and jaw-dropping. It's quite confronting in some parts. But in terms of the sort of making politics into entertainment and a circus, there's a pretty straight line from wrestling to Donald Trump.
So interesting. Do you have any fashion recommendations, or are we just leaving it there?
Do you want to know my colour for next year?
Oh, yes.
yeah.
Yeah, I absolutely do. Is it still, because trends move quickly. We all know that. So red's out. What's in?
I think it was...
Oh, it's not brown, is it? It wasn't.
That was the
I think it's going
Pantone.
to, in mocha mousse.
Yeah.
I think actually it will be more of a burgundy. So red is
I
sort
like
of still
burgundy.
in, but it'll be more of a...
I don't know.
Yeah,
Like
a
that's a bit more plum.
Merlot sort of situation.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay.
Okay.
I like it. Good to know.
Let's see. Maybe
more-
if I come back next year.
Yeah, we'll test you. We will mark your homework.
Sounds good.
For more from us at The Squiz, make sure you hit follow on your podcast app. On Saturdays, Claire and I host a podcast called Weekly Wrap. Claire, what is it?
It is the week in news and what's coming up.
That is very succinct.
Thank you.
Perfect to keep up with the news in just 30 minutes each week. We reckon it's the year to be informed, not overwhelmed, and the best place to achieve that is with The Squiz. Chat to you next week. Thanks for watching. For more news with the Squiz, make sure to hit subscribe using the button below.
We're your shortcut to being informed.